We tend to forget that the oppressor only sees Black people. The oppressor doesn't care whether or not you're from the Caribbean, whether you're from Africa, whether you're from the United States. The oppressor only sees Black people. This creator is speaking as an African immigrant, but her message can be applied to Caribbean immigrants as well. Susan Flyer is an anesthesiologist who grew up in the US and shares that she never really understood race in America until she went to medical school. Her experience is not uncommon among immigrants from the Caribbean and the African continent who move to white majority countries and have to come face to face with their Blackness for the first time in their lives.
It is way more than mindset, and I'm going to explain my reasoning. I moved to the US as a kid, and since I was young, I always wanted to be a doctor. We didn't have any family doctors in my family. We didn't have any friends that were doctors. But the only thing I could think of is growing up in East Africa, when I went to the doctors, they were Black, and I always did well in school, and successful people became doctors, lawyers, business people. So I wanted to be a doctor. You couldn't tell me nothing. Came here, tried to befriend everybody in school, but the little Black kids were really mean to me, so I befriended more white kids and Hispanic kids. I was told all the time that I spoke like a white person. I had a white name. I have family that is African American from my stepmom's side, and they would tell me that I'm listening to white music because I preferred pop music. I didn't care. I went on about my business. My childhood, the way I look at it, was as an African immigrant childhood. I went off to military first, then I went to college, and then medical school. At adulthood is when I started making African American friends. And I still remained very naive to the weight of my Blackness until medical school. It wasn't even bad in medical school. It was just this one instance where I got a bad grade in one of the classes, and our associate dean gave me a come to Jesus talk about being Black, and that I had to present myself for a certain way, and I could not act the same way as the Caucasian kids, and I could not fall asleep during lecture when it's only 5 of you guys anyway, and just basically telling me you cannot behave the same way as the white kids and expect to be treated the same way. The consequences are different. And oh boy, did I see those consequences being doled out differently when I was in residency. That's when I went into a deep depression, anxiety, took some time off, saw a psychiatrist, went on some meds because the subjectivity of residency, the people in my program, the people in charge of my program basically kept giving me bad evaluations, telling me I couldn't amount to anything, I couldn't be an anesthesiologist, I wasn't fit, I wasn't smart, all these things. And it's not like I didn't make mistakes. I admit I made mistakes. However, I saw the different consequences being doled out to me and to my white counterparts, especially the male counterparts. And lo and behold, I call my African American circle of friends, and we're all having similar issues. We're all struggling in residency year after year. Some of us are actually not getting our contracts renewed. And what is it that we had in common? We had our Blackness in common. So in my 30s is when it really hit me like a Mack truck. The weight of my skin color and the roadblocks that it could put in front of me really hit me. But imagine having that as a child, okay? I was in my 30s. I was an adult. I was a strong African woman. So I was able to be resilient and keep pushing forward. With all my nights of crying and my depression, I was still able to persevere and go forward. But imagine experiencing all that negativity growing up as a Black kid when your brain is still so young and it's still so malleable. You're watching the news, you're seeing nothing but bad things being portrayed about the African Americans. You don't necessarily have access to people who are successful, who look like you, who are mentors to you, outside of what? Rappers and ball players. The generational trauma, the racism, the bias, the roadblocks that are put upon the African Americans and brings a lot of them to where they are today can't be ignored. So if you're an African person and you choose to ignore that fact, considering the reason you're here and you have access to what you have access to is because African Americans fought for equality, then you're just choosing to stay ignorant. That's my take. That's my African American experience. I identify more as an African American in that regard versus an African person.
As I listen to Dr. Flower, I think about how many times I've heard Caribbean immigrants repeat white supremacist talking points when referring to African Americans, with no effort to try to understand the historic systemic oppression that African Americans have had to endure. We tend to focus on our individual access to certain opportunities without looking at the deeper nuance of how being born into such an oppressive system might impact one's ability, both physically and psychologically, to succeed in such an oppressive environment. We tend to forget that the oppressor only sees Black people. The oppressor doesn't care whether or not you're from the Caribbean, whether you're from Africa, whether you're from the United States. The oppressor only sees Black people. And the oppressor has no problem taking advantage of whatever prejudices you may have against other Black people and using you to fulfill their goal against other Black people. I am many things, but I will never be a tool for the oppressor against my own people.